Sarah woke before dawn, drenched in cold sweat, her body shivering violently despite the heater humming softly in the corner of her small apartment in Crestwood, Oregon. Something had pulled her out of sleep, an invisible grip, a pressure in the room, a lingering sense that she had not been alone during the night. The darkness felt heavier than usual, thick and unmoving, and the air carried a strange chill that seeped into her bones. She sat up slowly, clutching the covers to her chest, trying to steady the tremors in her hands as she scanned the shadows shifting along the walls. The room looked normal, but her instincts screamed that something unnatural had passed through, leaving a cold residue behind. She moved through her morning routine in a daze, trying to shake the feeling of being watched. As she poured herself coffee, her mind drifted back to Victor, the mysterious man who had entered her life with a silence that felt deliberate, like a whisper slipping between pages of an old book. She had met him only weeks ago, yet her thoughts orbiting around him now felt compulsive, almost involuntary. His unnervingly pale complexion, the stillness in his movements, the way his eyes seemed to glow faintly under certain lights, it had all seemed peculiar at first, but curiosity had outweighed caution. Now, that curiosity sat like a stone in her chest, pulling her deeper into a truth she wasn't sure she wanted to face. Sarah spent the early hours combing through online archives, newspaper clippings, and public records, but nothing about Victor Hale matched the normal rhythm of human existence. There were no social media accounts, no work history, no trace of a family, no proof that he existed at all beyond the moments she had seen him with her own eyes. She broadened her search to Crestwood town records, finding scattered mentions of a man with the same name, each decades apart, each described vaguely, each appearing and disappearing without explanation. The details were always consistent, tall, extremely pale, unchanging in appearance. The earliest mention dated back to the late 1800s, a brief note about a quiet stranger who kept to himself. The next appeared in 1924, then again in 1962, and then 1998. Every photograph was missing or damaged, but the descriptions were identical across time. The pattern sent a cold ripple through her spine, but she refused to accept the obvious implication. People in Crestwood were known for telling ghost stories and folklore during the colder seasons. She assumed someone had recycled the same descriptions for dramatic effect, weaving the image of a timeless stranger for entertainment. Yet the more she read, the more the reality around her began to warp, as if the shadows in her home stretched longer, the corners darkened faster, and the stillness of the air thickened with every new piece of information she uncovered. As she stepped outside to clear her mind, the town felt subtly different. The crisp October morning carried more bite than it should, and as she walked past the quiet houses with their fall decorations and carved pumpkins, the cold followed her like a living shadow. She noticed the way the trees bowed unnaturally in the wind, the way birds scattered too quickly when she passed beneath them, and the way stray animals froze and stared, their bodies rigid, their eyes wide. Something unseen pressed against the atmosphere, distorting it, making her every movement feel heavier and slower. Everyone she passed seemed to be moving quickly, avoiding eye contact, but their hushed glances lingered. She caught fragments of wary expressions, the kind born from fear rather than curiosity, and she sensed that many of them knew something she did not. She had heard whispers around town, rumors of creatures in the woods, pale figures that stalked the night, glowing eyes seen between branches. She had dismissed these as local superstition. But now, with the cold clinging to her skin and her breath fogging unnaturally, she wasn't so sure. That afternoon, she visited the Historical Society building, searching for any truth hidden in dusty archives. The older records were the strangest, handwritten accounts describing a man who never aged, who appeared during the coldest months, who walked silently through the fog. One entry referenced the pale one who feeds under the crescent moon, while another mentioned the man with winter eyes. None used the word directly, but the implication was unmistakable. Sarah tried to push away the rising panic, telling herself these records were created during times of superstition, when people blamed the supernatural for every unexplained event. But then the strange occurrences began to follow her home. That night, the temperature in her apartment plummeted, frost forming across her windows despite the thermostat being set to 72 degrees. Objects shifted without explanation, a chair slightly angled, a drawer left ajar, her journal moved to the opposite side of the room. The lights flickered at odd intervals, casting long and unnatural shadows that seemed to sway on their own. Her reflection in mirrors appeared delayed, as though her image lingered a moment too long after she moved away. She increasingly woke with the feeling of breath against her neck, cold and deliberate, as if something hovered close while she slept. Her obsession grew into desperation. She needed answers. She needed proof. She needed something concrete to explain the fear fluttering constantly in her chest. The turning point came when she found an old trail leading into Crestwood Forest, a place many residents avoided after dark. Something drew her deeper, the same pull she felt whenever Victor's presence neared. In the clearing, half buried under moss and fallen leaves, she discovered a rusted metal lockbox containing items that made her stomach churn, old letters written in elegant script, dried flowers that crumbled at her touch, and a fragment of a photograph showing an unmistakable silhouette. The figure looked exactly like Victor, but the picture was dated 1911. Panic tightened in her chest, but she still tried to rationalize it as coincidence or elaborate town folklore. Yet every instinct deep inside her whispered the same terrifying truth: she was dealing with something ancient. Something inhuman. Something that did not belong to the world she understood. Despite her fear, she couldn't stop. She couldn't pull away. Curiosity and dread held her captive, dragging her deeper into the darkness surrounding Victor. The more she searched, the more the truth brushed against her like a breath from the shadows, cold, silent, patient. Something was watching her. Something was following her. And she knew, without understanding how, that whatever it was connected to him. By the next morning, Sarah moved through her apartment like a ghost, her thoughts consumed by the patterns she had uncovered. She could no longer pretend the strange coldness, the unnatural shadows, and the eerie silence were coincidences. Crestwood seemed frozen in time each night, the wind dying entirely, the moon hanging lower than it should. And the woods resting too quiet, as if the trees themselves waited for something to arrive. Every drop in temperature felt like a warning, every flicker of light a signal, every shift of air a message she could not decipher. She began tracking every unusual occurrence in a notebook: times, temperatures, sensations, and vague impressions she felt when moving through certain parts of town. The patterns became undeniable. The cold always came when Victor was near. The shadows shifted more aggressively on nights he appeared in public places. Stray dogs growled at empty space whenever he passed. Even children stared with unsettling stillness, their bodies rigid, as though sensing something invisible hovering around him. The more she wrote, the clearer the picture became: Victor was not bound by the natural world. He existed between darkness and fog, moving through the quiet spaces where humans rarely looked. Desperate for a rational explanation, Sarah turned to books on folklore and ancient myths, hoping to find a symbolic meaning behind the recurring signs. But each description of old creatures, the ones who fed on life, who walked through the cold, who observed humans with hunger rather than curiosity, felt uncomfortably close to what she was experiencing. She stumbled upon stories describing shadows that moved independently, creatures who preserved a youthful appearance for centuries, beings who manipulated light and temperature. The deeper she read, the more the word she had tried to avoid settled in her mind with heavy certainty: vampire. She resisted the thought with every fiber of her being. Vampires belonged in fiction, not in the quiet neighborhoods of small American towns. And yet, the evidence surrounding Victor was too strong to ignore. She noticed that he never ventured outdoors during daylight hours. She witnessed the way he moved, too fast, too silent, too smooth, as if the air parted for him. She remembered the night she saw his reflection faintly blurred in a window, fading at the edges like smoke. And she felt the cold, always the cold, that lingered around him like an invisible aura. One evening, unable to bear the weight of uncertainty, she followed Victor's path into the edge of Crestwood Forest. She walked quietly, her breath shallow, her senses sharpened by fear. The forest was unnaturally still, no rustling leaves, no distant owls, not even the sound of her own footsteps registering fully against the earth. She felt suspended in time. The deeper she walked, the colder the air became, forming a low mist that hugged the ground. Then she saw it: faint footprints in the dirt, too deep, too sharp, spaced unnaturally far apart, imprints left by something moving with unnatural strength and speed. Her steps carried her toward an old cabin that had long been abandoned. Something tugged her inside, a pull she couldn't explain. The interior was consumed by darkness, yet she sensed layers of history embedded in the wooden walls. As she moved further in, her foot bumped against something buried beneath a loose floorboard. She knelt, lifted the wood, and found a weathered leather journal wrapped in cloth stained with age. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The entries dated back hundreds of years. Names of towns she had never heard of, written in archaic handwriting. Descriptions of nights spent hunting under moonlight. Mentions of feeding, of survival, of centuries passing like seasons. The author wrote with chilling detail about enduring wars, plagues, and eras rising and falling. Each page carried the same elegant signature, Victor Hale. It was impossible, yet undeniable. The man she knew had lived long before the town of Crestwood even existed. Realization crashed over her with suffocating force. Victor had walked through centuries. Victor had survived ages of time. Victor was not human. She stumbled backward, the journal clutched against her chest, her breath sharp and unsteady as the truth swallowed her whole. Her knees weakened beneath her. The cold in the room intensified, creeping up her spine like a frozen hand. She fled the cabin with the journal, her heart racing as she sprinted through the dark woods. The silence felt predatory now, heavy with invisible eyes watching her frantic movements. When she finally reached her apartment, she locked every door, shut every window, and pulled the curtains tightly closed. But the cold followed her inside, building in intensity as the sky darkened. Sarah paced the living room, the journal lying open on the coffee table, its pages illuminated by the dim glow of a lamp. Her mind raced with fear and disbelief. She replayed every moment she had spent with Victor, every strange encounter, every sudden chill, every time shadows had seemed to move on their own. The truth pressed down on her like a weight, suffocating and terrifying. Finally, she gathered the courage to confront him. She approached her bedroom window, gripping the journal in her hand, preparing herself to find the right words, to demand answers. But as she reached for the curtain, a cold wave passed through the room, sharper than any she had felt before. Her breath fogged instantly. She pulled the curtain back. Her heart stopped. Victor stood outside. His face was expressionless. His body still as stone. His eyes glowing a deep, unnatural red that pierced directly into her soul. He had been watching. He had been waiting. And he knew. To be continued. Please subscribe for more.